When did you get started playing guitar?
I started playing the guitar, I was probably around 10 years old, and I actually started playing electric guitar, which I think is pretty common nowadays, at least with my friends and people I talk to. You're talking late 80s, so the time of Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, and then Skid Row, and this is the kind of music I was into at first, and my inspiration to play. And actually, my first instrument was a bass guitar, which didn't last very long. You can't be Slash playing the bass. So that lasted a year or so, and then I moved over to electric, standard guitar. And one of my biggest influences at first, of course, I mentioned Slash at first, and then Randy Rhoads of Ozzy Osbourne was a big influence, and I learned most of the tribute album. And actually, the first song that I actually made it through from beginning to end, including solo, was Mr. Crowley. I was really, really proud of that one. And then just went on from there. After those early days, and probably about the time I started high school, I started getting into metal. I clearly remember waking up one morning. It was pretty common for my oldest brother to set his alarm to music on the stereo, and really loud. I remember waking up one morning hearing "Take No Prisoners" by Megadeth on their Rust in Peace album, and this must have been, I don't know, 90, 91, 92 maybe. And that was a big turning point for me, hearing that kind of music. And from there, of course, I started getting into playing Megadeth and Marty Friedman's music, and then got into his earlier stuff with Cacophony and Jason Becker. And went on from there. I got into Malmsteen, and I guess towards the end of, well, and of course I got into Slayer and all that really heavy guys, Fear Factory and all this. But towards the end of when I was playing the electric guitar, I started playing, and I hesitate to say this, maybe more artistic music, like John Petrucci and Al Di Meola, things like that. And I wouldn't say I was really a musician at the time. I was more of a technician. I was always looking for the next hardest thing to play, the next challenge. Mm-hmm. And about that time, I guess, around the end, probably a year after I got out of high school, maybe 19 or so, I listened to a CD. It's actually a Christopher Parkening CD, 2-disc set. I think it's called The Great Recordings. I listened to this, and this is a CD I had for a couple of years that my mom got me, but I was never interested in hearing it. So, I was listening to new stuff at the time, so, I popped it in, and I was just blown away by listening to this stuff. There's a lot of, on that CD set, there's a lot of arrangements and standard guitar repertoire, and, those standards really blew me away, like, hearing tremolo for the first time, and a Bach fugue for the first time played on guitar. I was just leveled by hearing this. And, I didn't read music at the time. I read tablature, and the internet wasn't really around then. We didn't have it, so those tabs, if they were even written at the time, weren't available to me. Mm-hmm. So I was doing ear transcriptions of these pieces, and that's how I started playing classical guitar. And then later I found out you can actually major in guitar in college, which I never planned on even going to college. So that was a pretty exciting time, going to audition to play classical guitar in a guitar program.
Gotcha. Could you talk a little bit about other influences on your decision to go to school? Where'd you study, I guess?
Yeah, I studied at Middle Tennessee State University. This is in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. The professor there, Billy Elverton, big influence on me in my early days, and still today. He was actually the first classical guitarist I saw play in person. I remember the first time I saw him play was in our rep class, which met every week. He played the Allegro from the Prelude, Fugue, and Allegro, Bach. And, just blown away again, seeing someone actually perform this repertoire at a high level. That was a big influence on me. When I started college, I wasn't really set on playing classical guitar. One thing I hoped to accomplish by studying music in the university was just to be able to actually, write my own music, write my own solos that, made sense. To get that theory background behind me, but once I got in, because at the time it was all, I was in it for the challenge, and I wasn't really drawn to classical guitar by any artistic inclinations or, that sort of thing. It was for the challenge, but actually being exposed to players like that playing at a high level, putting artistry and passion into this music, really was a big influence on me. And after hearing that, I really didn't look back to the electric guitar. I still have all my gear here with me, but I haven't touched it in years.
So what sort of skills did you have to catch up on when you started school?
Everything right hand. I played for a pick for the first 10 years of my guitar days. So in the first pieces I was learning for classical guitar, the ear transcriptions were, I didn't know what I was doing. I was probably just using one finger at a time. And,
yeah.
Except of course with tremolo pieces, I was just kind of making my own patterns up there. Actually using 4 fingers for tremolo. But it was really frustrating at first because I came to classical guitar with a really developed left hand, but with nothing with my right hand. Unless I had a pick and of course my nails were an inch long and just rough, and so it's really frustrating at first. Having to basically start with pieces that any 10-year-old beginner would start with, really frustrating, and my ability to shred was no more, finger style anyway. So that's my first year I was like I said, frustrated with my inability to do anything with my right hand. And one thing I had a really big issue with was playing scales with index and middle finger alternation. I was working hard at it, and it was coming along, but I never could get to a point where I could match my left hand. So really early on, probably the first year, I started trying different things to try to match my left hand, trying different things with my right hand. I was kind of successful with tremolo at first, so that was my first idea to try to play scales with, was using a tremolo pattern, P-A-M-I. Didn't sound so great. It was a little awkward. Just looking at a lot of the studies that I saw early on, you get a lot of like in the box technique, which is what I call it, where you play a scale in one position, everything, each finger has its own fret assigned to it,
right? Yeah.
And then you shift if there's there's really not a lot of stretches in that style, the in the box kind of technique, and that's something that I never did. So I never did on the electric guitar. It's all like 3-note per string patterns. A lot of people use this on classical guitar as well, so it's not really new. But that's what I wanted to do. So whenever I would play a piece that had a scale in it, you know, at all costs, at any cost, I would, you know, arrange it 3 notes per string.